The horses were closing in, and Sarah McKenna knew she had perhaps minutes before her past caught up with her forever. 3 days she'd been running. 3 days since she'd witnessed what no woman should ever see: the cold-blooded murder of a federal marshal by the very men who'd sworn to uphold the law. Deputy Marshal Thomas Garrett and his brothers, corrupt to their souls, had made their fortune bleeding the territory dry. And Sarah, foolish, trusting Sarah, had seen it all from the back room of the trading post where she'd been mending their uniforms. Now the Arizona desert stretched before her like an ocean of dust and death. Her stolen mare, a chestnut beast she'd taken in desperation, was faltering. The animal's breathing came in ragged gasps that mirrored her own terror. Behind her, the distant thunder of pursuing hooves never ceased, never gave her a moment's peace. Sarah McKenna had been a schoolteacher, 23 years old. She'd come west with dreams of civilization and progress, of bringing education to rough frontier towns. She'd survived a father's early death, a mother's consumption, and the brutal crossing of the plains. But nothing had prepared her for this. The Garrett brothers wanted her dead, and they had the law on their side because they were the law. Her canteen was empty. The sun was a merciless weight upon her shoulders. Blood from rope burns stained her torn dress where she'd fought free from the storage room they'd locked her in. She'd climbed through a window no bigger than a barrel, dropped 10 feet to the hard ground below, and ran. But running, she was learning, was not the same as escaping. The desert showed no mercy to the unprepared. Her lips cracked and bled. Her hands, once soft and careful with chalk and primers, were raw and blistered from gripping the reins. The mare stumbled, caught itself, stumbled again. Sarah whispered apologies to the animal, knowing she was driving it to death, knowing she had no choice. Then the horse fell. Sarah hit the ground hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She lay there gasping, tasting blood and dust, hearing the approaching riders growing closer. For a moment, just one terrible moment, she considered simply staying down, letting it end. The thought was seductive in its simplicity, but Sarah McKenna had not survived 23 years of hardship to surrender now. She forced herself to stand, to move forward on foot, into the maze of red rock canyons that rose before her, like the walls of some ancient cathedral. The stone was warm beneath her bleeding palms as she climbed, higher, always higher, away from the trail, away from the sound of men who wanted her silence more than they wanted their own salvation. And then, at the moment when her strength finally failed, when her legs could carry her no further, she saw them. 3 Apache warriors, mounted on painted ponies, watching her from the ridge above. Sarah's heart stopped. She'd heard the stories. Every white settler had heard the stories. The Apache were ghosts, demons, the most feared warriors in all the Southwest. They took no prisoners. They showed no mercy. Children grew up on tales of Apache raids, of settlements burned, of people who vanished into the desert and were never seen again. She looked back toward the canyon mouth, toward the Garrett brothers and their certain vengeance, then forward, toward the 3 silent warriors whose faces she could not read. Behind her lay death disguised as justice. Before her lay the unknown. Sarah McKenna, schoolteacher, orphan, witness to murder, closed her eyes, said a prayer her mother had taught her, and took one more step forward, toward the Apache, toward whatever fate awaited her in their hands. The choice, she understood with terrible clarity, was not between life and death. It was between which death she would choose: the predictable brutality of corrupt lawmen, or the mysterious judgment of warriors whose ways she could never understand. She chose mystery. She chose the Apache. The warrior who descended from the ridge moved with a silence that defied nature itself. His name was Nantan, though Sarah would not learn this for many days. He was perhaps 30 years, lean and hard as the desert itself, with eyes that missed nothing. Behind him came 2 others, Goyawe, younger, with a scar across his cheekbone that spoke of battles survived, and Beshkala, the eldest, his face a map of years and wisdom. They surrounded her without speaking, without threat, without mercy, simply observing. Sarah stood trembling, every muscle screaming, every breath a labor. She raised her hands slowly, palms outward, in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. Her lips moved, but no sound emerged. Fear had stolen her voice as thoroughly as exhaustion had stolen her strength. Nantan dismounted. He approached her with the caution one might show a wounded animal. Something to be assessed. Something potentially dangerous despite its apparent helplessness. His gaze moved from her torn dress to her bleeding hands, to the desperation written across her face. Then he heard them, the Garrett brothers, their voices echoing off canyon walls as they searched for their prey. Nantan's head turned sharply toward the sound. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his back. For a long moment that stretched into eternity. He stood perfectly still, listening, calculating. Then he looked back at Sarah McKenna with eyes that seemed to peer into her very soul. He saw something there, something that made him decide. With a sharp gesture, he indicated she should follow. Not a request, a command. Sarah's legs moved before her mind could catch up, driven by pure survival instinct. Goyawe brought his pony alongside her, extended his arm. She grasped it, felt herself pulled upward with surprising strength, positioned behind the young warrior. They moved, fast, through passages in the rock Sarah would never have seen, along trails that seemed to exist only in the minds of those who knew them. The Apache rode as if they and their horses were a single creature, flowing over the landscape like water finding its course. Behind them, the angry shouts of Thomas Garrett and his brothers echoed and faded. Sarah clung to Goyawe's back, her face pressed against rough buckskin, her arms wrapped tight around his torso. She felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the controlled power of his movements. This was not mercy. She understood. This was something else, a decision made for reasons she could not yet fathom. They rode for hours as the sun climbed toward its zenith, and then began its long descent. The landscape changed from red rock to pine forest, from desert heat to mountain coolness. Sarah's awareness narrowed to simple sensations, the movement of the horse beneath her, the ache in her arms, the terrible thirst that made her tongue feel like leather. Finally, as shadows grew long, they arrived. The Apache camp was unlike anything Sarah had imagined. Not the savage encampment of settler stories, but a community. Wickiups made of brush and hide dotted a clearing beside a spring. Women tended fires, children played, elders sat in council. Life, simple and profound, unfolding as it had for generations. Their arrival brought immediate attention. Warriors emerged from wickiups. Women stopped their work. Children fell silent. Every eye turned toward the white woman who sagged against Goyawe's back, more dead than alive. An older woman approached. Her name was Casa, and her face bore the marks of both compassion and fierce judgment. She spoke rapidly to Nantan in their tongue, her words sharp with questions. He responded with equal intensity, gesturing toward the canyon, toward Sarah, toward the distant horizon. A debate ensued. Sarah could not understand the words, but she understood the tone. Some voices raised in anger, others in caution. She was being discussed, evaluated, judged. Her fate balanced on the edge of a knife she could not see. Then another figure emerged from the largest wickiup, Taza, the band's Nantan, their leader. He was perhaps 50 years, his hair streaked with silver, his bearing that of a man who had led his people through trials Sarah could not imagine. He walked with a slight limp, an old wound that had never properly healed. But his eyes were sharp and clear and missed nothing. He studied Sarah for a long moment, studied her terror, her exhaustion, her desperation. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. The debate ended. Casa stepped forward, her expression unreadable. She gestured for Sarah to follow her. Not gently, not harshly, simply a command. Sarah slid from the horse, her legs nearly buckling. She followed Casa toward a smaller wickiup at the edge of the camp. Behind her, she heard the low murmur of continued discussion. She did not need to speak Apache to know she was the subject. Inside the wickiup, Casa pointed to a sleeping mat, then to a clay vessel filled with water. She spoke a single word that Sarah did not understand, but the meaning was clear enough. Rest, drink, live. For now. Sarah sank onto the mat, lifted the vessel with shaking hands, and drank. The water was cool and sweet and tasted like salvation. She drank until Casa took the vessel from her hands, preventing her from making herself sick. Then Sarah McKenna, schoolteacher, fugitive, stranger in the strangest land, lay back on the mat and surrendered to the darkness that had been chasing her for 3 endless days. She did not know if she would wake. She did not know if waking would be a blessing or a curse. She knew only that the choice had been made. The path had been chosen. And there was no turning back. Not now. Not ever. Sarah woke to pain. Everywhere, all at once. Her body was a catalog of suffering. Blisters had become infections. Rope burns had deepened. Muscles she'd pushed beyond their limits now screamed their protest. But she was alive. And that, she realized with something like surprise, mattered. Morning light filtered through the wickiup's opening. Outside, she heard the sounds of the camp awakening. Voices in a language that flowed like water over stones. The crackle of fires being rekindled. The soft sounds of daily life beginning anew. Casa entered without announcement, carrying a shallow bowl and strips of cloth. The older woman's face remained impassive as she knelt beside Sarah, began tending to her wounds with practiced efficiency. The salve she used burned, but Sarah bit back any cry. She sensed, somehow, that weakness here would not be met with sympathy. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and learning. Sarah discovered that refuge came with expectations. She was not a guest. She was not a prisoner. She existed in some undefined space between, and that space demanded contribution. Casa made this clear through gesture and demonstration, when words failed to bridge the gap between their worlds. Sarah learned to grind mesquite beans into flour. Her soft hands blistered anew, then calloused. She learned to carry water from the spring, balancing clay vessels on her hip as the Apache women did. She learned to gather sotol and agave, to recognize which plants sustained life and which brought death. She failed, constantly and spectacularly. The flour she ground was too coarse. The water she carried spilled. The plants she gathered were wrong, and once dangerously wrong. A young woman named Zitkala, perhaps 18 years, with quick hands and quicker laughter, snatched the bundle from Sarah's arms with a cry of alarm. Zitkala held up a plant Sarah had collected, spoke rapidly to the other women, and they all stared at Sarah with something between horror and disbelief. Poison. She had gathered poison, but Zitkala did not abandon her. Instead, the young woman took Sarah by the hand, led her back to the desert, and began teaching her, slowly, patiently, showing her the differences between plants that looked nearly identical to untrained eyes. Life and death, Sarah learned, could be separated by the shape of a leaf, the color of a stem. She learned other things too, harder things. She learned that the Apache lived constantly on the edge of survival, that the life of peace she observed in camp was an illusion maintained only through constant vigilance, that the white man's expansion had pushed them into ever smaller territories, hunted them like animals, broken treaty after treaty until the word itself became meaningless. She learned that Nantan had lost his wife and daughter to a cavalry raid 2 years prior, that Beshkela had seen his entire band massacred when he was a boy, that every person in this camp carried scars, visible and invisible, inflicted by people who looked like her. The weight of this knowledge was crushing. One evening, as she sat grinding mesquite beans beside Casa, Sarah began to weep, quietly, trying to hide it, but Casa saw. The older woman's hand, rough and warm, covered Sarah's own. Casa spoke words Sarah did not understand, but the tone was clear. We all carry pain, we all survive, or we do not. Sarah learned to ride like the Apache rode. Goya Awe took this task upon himself, teaching her through demonstration and sharp correction. He placed her on a spotted mare named Ishkeen, a horse with more patience than Sarah deserved. Day after day, Goya Awe led her through the pine forests, showing her how to move with the animal rather than against it, how to read the land, how to disappear into landscape that seemed to offer no concealment. She fell often, bruises layered upon bruises, but each time, she climbed back on. Goya Awe never smiled, but she sensed his approval in the way he gradually increased the difficulty of their rides, trusted her with more challenging terrain. She learned the Apache language slowly, painfully, one word at a time. Zitkala became her teacher in this, repeating words until Sarah's tongue could form the unfamiliar sounds. Water, fire, sky, horse, danger, friend. Each word was a small victory, a brick in the bridge being built between her world and theirs. At night, Sarah lay in her wiki-up and listened to the sounds of the camp. She heard songs she did not understand, stories told in a language that flowed like poetry, laughter that reminded her these fierce warriors were also fathers, mothers, children, fully human in ways the settler stories had never acknowledged. 6 weeks passed, then 2 months. The Garrett brothers did not find her. Sarah did not know if they were still searching, or if they had given her up for dead. Either way, the distance between her old life and her new one grew wider with each passing day. But distance, she was learning, was not the same as safety, and the past, no matter how far you ran, had a way of catching up. The first time Sarah successfully made peaky bread without burning it, Casa actually smiled. It was a small thing, a brief softening of features that quickly returned to their usual sternness. But Sarah saw it, and something inside her chest loosened. Acceptance, not complete, perhaps never complete, but acceptance nonetheless. 4 months in the Apache camp had transformed her in ways she could not have imagined. Her hands were no longer a schoolteacher's hands. They were scarred and calloused, strong from grinding and weaving and endless work. Her skin had darkened under the relentless sun. Her body had shed the softness of town life, replacing it with lean muscle and surprising endurance. But the deeper changes were harder to name. She no longer flinched at sudden movements, no longer startled at the sound of horses approaching. The constant vigilance that had felt like torture in those first weeks had become second nature. She could read the camp's rhythms, sense tension before it became visible, understand without words when danger was near. Zitkala had become something like a sister. The young Apache woman had a gift for languages, speaking not just Apache and Spanish but broken English learned from traders. She became Sarah's bridge to understanding, translating not just words but context, meaning, the unspoken rules that governed life in the band. Through Zitkala, Sarah learned that Taza had allowed her to stay because Nantan had vouched for her, that Nantan had seen in her eyes the same desperate flight he had once made himself, years ago, fleeing a different kind of death, that the debate on that first day had been fierce, with some arguing she was a spy, others arguing she was simply too much of a risk. But Nantan had spoken for her, and Taza had trusted Nantan's judgment. Sarah understood, with humbling clarity, that she owed her life to a man who had every reason to hate people like her. She tried to tell Nantan this once, tried to express her gratitude in her halting Apache. He had looked at her for a long moment, his scarred face unreadable. Then he spoke words that Zitkala later translated. "We do not save people to be thanked. We save them because it is right, or we do not, and accept those consequences too." Winter came to the high country. The Apache prepared with the efficiency of people who had survived countless winters before. Meat was dried, wood was gathered, the wiki-ups were reinforced against the cold that would soon descend. Sarah worked alongside the women, no longer an outsider, not quite an insider, but something in between. She learned to tan hides, to sew with sinew, to create beauty from the raw materials of survival. Casa taught her to make baskets so tightly woven they could hold water. Her first attempts were laughable, but by her 20th basket, her hands had learned the rhythm. One evening, as snow began to fall, Taza called a gathering. The entire band assembled around the central fire. Sarah sat with the women, as was proper, but she understood enough now to follow the discussion. Scouts had reported cavalry movements. A new fort was being built to the south. Tensions were rising. The fragile peace that had held through autumn was beginning to fracture. War was coming. Again. Always again. Sarah felt the weight of her presence in that moment. She was white, the enemy, no matter how much she learned, how much she adapted. That fact remained unchanged. She half expected to be cast out, sent away before she could become a liability. But Taza's next words surprised her. He spoke of the necessity of understanding one's enemies, of the value of seeing through different eyes. He did not name Sarah directly, but his gaze passed over her as he spoke. She understood. She was being claimed. Not as Apache, but as someone who existed in the space between worlds. Someone who might, in the dangerous times ahead, prove valuable in ways neither side could predict. That night, Zitkala brought Sarah a gift, a dress of soft buckskin, decorated with small shells and dyed quills. It was beautiful, simple and practical and beautiful. Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted it. She understood what it meant. This was not assimilation. The Apache had no desire to erase who she was, but it was recognition, a marking of her transformation from outsider to something else, something the English language had no word for. She wore the dress the next day. It fit perfectly, moved with her body in ways her torn settler clothes never had. Some of the children stared. Some of the older warriors frowned. But Casa nodded approval, and that mattered more than Sarah could express. Goyawe began teaching her to shoot. Not the rifle, but the bow. He placed the weapon in her hands with the same patient intensity he had shown when teaching her to ride, drew her arms back, adjusted her stance, spoke quietly about breathing, about focus, about the moment between intention and release. Sarah's first arrow flew wide. Her second buried itself in the dirt. Her third found the edge of the target. Goyawe's grunt might have been approval, or it might have been acknowledgement of incremental progress. Either way, Sarah felt a fierce pride bloom in her chest. She was learning. She was surviving. She was becoming something her former self would not recognize. But she was also, in quiet moments, grieving the life she had lost, the dreams of teaching children their letters, the simple hope of building something permanent in a wild land. That Sarah McKenna was gone, burned away in the crucible of desperate flight and brutal adaptation. This new Sarah, this woman with calloused hands and wind-burned face and eyes that no longer flinched from harsh truths, she was stronger. She was more. But she had been purchased at a price Sarah had never anticipated paying. She told Zitkala this one night, struggling with words in both English and Apache, trying to express the peculiar grief of surviving your own transformation. Zitkala listened, then spoke words that would stay with Sarah forever. We are all becoming, until we stop. And then we are nothing. Your grief proves you are still alive, still becoming. That is good. That is what matters. Sarah McKenna, no longer quite the woman she had been, not yet who she would become, sat under stars that looked the same from every world, and accepted the truth of those words. She was alive. She was becoming. And in this moment, cold and uncertain and perched on the knife's edge of an unknowable future, that was enough. The first sign that the past was not finished with her came on a morning bright with false promise. Sarah was gathering firewood with Zitkala and two other women, Desba and her daughter Nasha, in a grove of piñon pine about a mile from camp. It was early spring. The snow was melting. The world was awakening. Sarah's arms were full of dead branches when she heard Nasha's sharp intake of breath. Riders, 3 of them, moving through the valley below, Sarah's heart stopped. She knew those silhouettes, knew them in her bones, the way Thomas Garrett sat his horse, straight-backed and arrogant, the way his brother James slouched, dangerous and lazy all at once, the way Michael, the youngest, rode slightly ahead, always trying to prove himself. 6 months. They had been hunting her for 6 months. Zitkala's hand gripped Sarah's arm with bruising force. The Apache woman was already calculating, already moving. She gestured sharply. They dropped the firewood, abandoning it where it fell, moving quickly but carefully back toward camp through terrain that would hide their passage. Sarah's mind raced. The Garrett brothers were here, in Apache territory. This was not coincidence. This was not random patrol. They were searching, still searching. Their hatred burned with a heat that 6 months had not diminished. And they were close, too close. The camp mobilized with the speed of people who had survived by never hesitating. Taza gave quiet orders. Warriors gathered weapons. Women secured the children. Everything that had seemed peaceful moments before revealed itself as the careful preparation it had always been. Nantan found Sarah. His face was hard, his eyes harder. He spoke rapidly in Apache. Zitkala translated, her voice tight with tension. They ask if those men hunt you, if you brought danger to us. Sarah's throat was dry. She forced herself to meet Nantan's gaze, to not look away from the judgment she deserved. She nodded. Yes. They hunt me. Yes. I brought this to your door. She expected anger, expected to be cast out, expected the Apache to wash their hands of a white woman's troubles. But Nantan did something that broke her heart. He nodded once, then turned to Taza and spoke a single word. Zitkala's breath came out in a rush. She looked at Sarah with something like wonder. He says you are under protection. He says these men will not take you. Not while he breathes. Sarah's eyes burned. She did not deserve this, did not deserve their loyalty. She had brought nothing but danger, had given them nothing but another burden to carry. But the Apache had made their choice, and Apache choices once made were iron. The band moved deeper into the mountains, to a place Taza called the Hidden Springs, a place where rock formations created natural fortifications, where any approach could be seen long before it became a threat. They moved with practiced efficiency, erasing their tracks, leaving false trails, becoming ghosts in the land that was theirs by blood and history. Sarah moved with them, her heart a stone in her chest. That night, around a carefully shielded fire, Taza spoke. His words were measured, deliberate. Zitkala translated quietly into Sarah's ear. These white men break the peace. They ride where they have no right. This is not your fault alone. This is the pattern we have seen for generations. They take, and when we defend what is ours, we are called savages. He paused, looked directly at Sarah. But you ran from your own people's injustice. You sought shelter. We gave it. That debt is sacred. We do not abandon our own. Our own. Sarah's vision blurred. She was not Apache, would never be Apache. But in this moment, in this declaration, she was claimed nonetheless. Beshkala, the eldest warrior, spoke next. His voice was rough with age and wisdom. The white men will not stop. Men like them never stop. They will search, they will find. We must decide. Do we hide forever, or do we end this? The debate that followed was intense. Sarah understood perhaps half of it, but she understood the core. Some argued for continuing to evade. Others argued that the Garrett brothers represented a threat that would never diminish, that would lead more white men to Apache territory, that would compromise the band's safety as long as they lived. Nantan was silent through most of the discussion. Then, when others had finished, he spoke. I will go to them. I will speak. I will tell them she is under our protection, that they must leave or face consequences. Taza's expression was skeptical. These white men, they will not listen. They do not see us as human. They will not honor words. Then, Nantan said quietly, They will honor actions. The council broke. Warriors began preparing. Sarah understood with cold clarity what was coming. The Apache would not hide forever. They would confront the threat. And blood, quite possibly, would be shed. Because of her. Because she had fled to them. Because they had chosen honor over expedience. Sarah found Nantan before he left with the scouting party. She struggled with words, with the inadequacy of language to express what churned inside her. Why do this? I am nothing to you, let them take me. End this. Nantan looked at her with eyes that had seen too much death, too much loss. He spoke slowly, making sure she understood each word. You think you are nothing, but you ran when it would have been easier to submit. You survived when it would have been easier to die. You learned when it would have been easier to remain ignorant. You are not nothing. You are proof that people can change, can see beyond what they were taught. And that? Sarah McKenna. That is worth protecting. He left before she could respond. Left her standing in the firelight with tears streaming down her face. The Apache did not cry easily. Zitkala had told her this. Tears were precious water in a dry land, not to be wasted on emotion. But Sarah wept anyway. Wept for the burden of being valued. Wept for the fear of what was coming. Wept for the terrible beauty of being claimed by people who owed her nothing. The next 2 days were a study in tension. Scouts came and went. Reports filtered back. The Garrett brothers were searching systematically, working through the terrain with grim determination. They had supplies, they had weapons, they had the kind of righteous certainty that made men dangerous. Sarah volunteered to leave, to draw them away, to sacrifice herself for the people who had saved her. Taza refused. His word was absolute. On the 3rd day, Nantan returned. His face was grim. He had attempted parley, had approached under truce, had spoken to the Garrett brothers in his broken English. They had laughed, called him savage, called Sarah a white woman who belonged with white men, threatened to bring the cavalry down on any Apache who harbored her. Then Thomas Garrett, deputy marshal and murderer, had spit at Nantan's feet. The Apache did not forgive insult, could not afford to. In a world where reputation and respect were the only currency that mattered, where strength was the only deterrent to extinction, such disrespect could not stand. Taza called the warriors together, spoke quietly but with iron in his voice. They will come here. They will try to take what is ours. We will show them the cost of disrespect. Sarah's hands shook as she helped prepare the camp's defenses. This was her fault, her past, her decision to flee here. And now these people, these fierce, proud, generous people, would fight because of it. Zitkala found her that night, sat beside her in the darkness. You carry guilt that is not yours to carry, Zitkala said. They chose to be monsters. You chose to survive. Do not confuse the two. But people will die, Sarah whispered. Yeah, Zitkala agreed. They might, we might. This is the world the white man made. We live in it, or we die in it. But we do not apologize for surviving it. Sarah McKenna, survivor, refugee, woman caught between worlds, sat in the darkness and felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down. The Garrett brothers were coming. The Apache would stand. And blood, one way or another, would water the desert soil. Tomorrow would bring the reckoning. Tomorrow would reveal whether refuge could be defended, whether honor could triumph over hatred. Tomorrow would answer questions Sarah had never wanted to ask. But tonight, she sat with Zitkala under stars that witnessed everything and judged nothing, and tried to find peace in the terrible courage of people who refused to surrender what was right, even when right came with such an unbearable cost. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of morning that made the desert beautiful and terrible all at once. Sarah stood with the women and children in the protected hollow behind the hidden springs, her heart a drum in her chest. She could see the defensive positions the warriors had taken, could see Nantan and Goyaway and Beshkela among the rocks, could see the careful preparation that spoke of too much experience with fights like these. Taza had been explicit. Sarah was to stay hidden. Her presence would only inflame the situation. This fight was no longer about her. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the Apache's absolute right to determine who received their protection. But knowing this did nothing to ease the guilt that sat like poison in her stomach. The Garrett brothers came at mid-morning. Sarah heard them before she saw them. Thomas's voice carrying across the rocks, arrogant and assured. "We know you're here, Sarah. Come out. These savages can't protect you forever." Sarah's fingernails bit into her palms. Beside her, Nasha's mother Desba placed a warning hand on her shoulder. "Do not move. Do not speak. Let the men handle this." Taza emerged from cover, stood on a high rock where he could be clearly seen. He spoke in English, his accent thick but his words clear. "You trespass. You hunt on Apache land. You will leave. Now." Thomas Garrett laughed. The sound echoed off canyon walls, mocking and cruel. "Apache land? There is no Apache land anymore, old man. This all belongs to the United States government, and that woman you're hiding is a fugitive. She witnessed a crime. She's needed for questioning." "Lies," Sarah breathed. "All lies." Taza's voice remained calm. "The woman is under our protection. She has committed no crime. You will leave." "Can't do that," James Garrett called out. He was positioned to Thomas's left, rifle ready. "See, Gwen, it's like this. We represent the law, and the law says we get that woman. Now you can hand her over peaceful-like, or we can come take her. Your choice." The silence that followed was terrible. Then Nantan spoke. His English was halting, but his meaning was absolutely clear. "You are not law. You are murderers. She saw your crime. You hunt her to hide your shame. This we know. This we will not allow." How Thomas Garrett learned Nantan's name, Sarah never knew, but he used it then, his voice dripping with contempt. "Nantan. That your name? Let me tell you something, Nantan. I don't give a damn what you think you know. That woman belongs with her own kind, not hiding behind some primitives who don't even—" The shot cracked across the canyon before Thomas could finish. Michael Garrett, the youngest, the one always trying to prove himself, had fired. Sarah saw the muzzle flash from his position on the western ridge, saw the bullet strike stone 3 feet from where Nantan stood, and just like that, the possibility of peace died. The Apache returned fire with devastating precision. Goyawe's rifle spoke once, twice. Michael Garrett's horse screamed and went down. The young man rolled clear, found cover, started shooting wildly. Thomas and James scattered to defensive positions. The canyon erupted with gunfire that echoed and re-echoed until it sounded like an army was fighting. Sarah watched in horror. This was not the clean violence of dime novel stories. This was chaos, dust and smoke and the terrible sounds of bullets striking stone, striking flesh. One of the younger Apache warriors, Nalnish, barely 20 years old, cried out and fell back, blood spreading across his shoulder. Desba was already moving, pulling Nalnish back to where the women waited. Casa took over with calm efficiency, packing the wound, binding it. Her hands were steady. This was not her first time tending bullet wounds. Not by far. The firefight lasted perhaps 20 minutes. It felt like hours. The Garrett brothers were skilled. Sarah gave them that. They found good positions, used their ammunition wisely, made the Apache pay for every inch of ground. But the Apache fought with a coordination that came from fighting together since boyhood. They moved like water, like ghosts, appearing where they were needed, disappearing before return fire could find them. Sarah saw Beshkela, the eldest, move with a speed that defied his years, saw him flank Michael Garrett's position, saw the young white man suddenly realize his mistake, saw the terror flash across his face as he understood he was surrounded. Then Taza's voice rang out, sharp, commanding. The Apache fire stopped. The silence was deafening. Taza called out in English, "Your youngest is in our sights. Surrender now, or we finish this." Thomas Garrett's response was a stream of curses that would have made devils blush, but his rifle did not fire. Neither did James's. They understood. They were beaten, slowly, hands visible. The three Garrett brothers emerged from cover. Michael was bleeding from a graze across his ribs. James limped from a bullet that had torn through his thigh. Thomas was untouched, but his face was a mask of rage. The Apache warriors surrounded them, took their weapons, forced them to their knees in the center of the canyon. Sarah could not stay hidden, could not let others speak for her. She emerged from the hollow, walked forward on legs that shook, stood before the men who had chased her across half of Arizona. Thomas Garrett's eyes went wide, then narrow, then filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful in its intensity. "You," he spat. "You did this. You brought these animals down on us. You—" Sarah's voice, even when she found it, was steady. Steadier than she thought possible. "I saw you murder Marshall Davidson. I saw you take his money. I saw you laugh about it. And I ran, because I knew you would kill me too." "Lies!" Thomas roared. "She's a liar!" Taza struck him, not hard, just enough to silence him. The Apache leader looked at Sarah, his eyes asking a question. She nodded. Everything she had said was truth. Taza turned back to Thomas. His voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "You hunt this woman for 6 months. You trespass on our land. You shoot first. You bring violence to our home. And still, we let you live. This is Apache mercy. You will not see it again." What are you going to do with us?" James asked. His voice shook. "We will take you to the edge of our territory," Taza said. "We will release you there. You will return to your people. You will tell them that the Apache protect those who seek refuge. You will tell them that this woman is ours now, that any who come for her, come for all of us." He paused. "Let the words sink in. And if you are wise, you will also tell them what you have done, the murder you committed, because if you do not, Sarah McKenna will. And the truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken." Thomas Garrett's face went white. The calculation was visible. The terrible understanding that his choices had narrowed to 2 impossibilities: confess his crime, or live forever knowing the Apache and Sarah could expose him at any moment. It was, Sarah realized, a kind of justice, imperfect, incomplete, but justice nonetheless. The Apache bound the Garrett brothers, loaded them on their wounded horses, and Nantan led a group of warriors to escort them away. Before they left, Nantan approached Sarah. He looked at her for a long moment. "You are free now," he said. "They will not hunt you again. They cannot afford to." Sarah's throat was tight. "Thank you, for everything, for—" He shook his head. "We protected what was ours. That is not something requiring thanks. That is simply what is." He left then. Left her standing in the canyon where blood and gun smoke still lingered in the air. Left her with the knowledge that she had been claimed, defended, saved by people who owed her nothing and had given her everything. Casa found her standing there. The older woman's hand was gentle on Sarah's shoulder. "Come," Casa said in Apache. "There is work. Always. There is work." And so Sarah McKenna returned to the camp, returned to grinding meal and tending wounds and helping Desba care for Nalnish's injury. Returned to the life that had become, impossibly, home. That night, as the band gathered around the fire, Taza spoke of the day's events, not as celebration, not as triumph, but as sober acknowledgement of violence required, of prices paid, of the eternal vigilance demanded by a world that gave the Apache no rest. Sarah sat among the women, wearing her buckskin dress, her hands wrapped around a cup of weak coffee. She listened to words she mostly understood, felt the weight of belonging that was both burden and blessing. She had been saved. She had been defended. The past that had hunted her for 6 months had finally been, not defeated, but held at bay, pushed back, given reason to fear. But she understood, with the clarity that comes from surviving impossible things, that this peace was temporary, that the world outside this canyon would not stop pressing in, that the Apache's time was running out, not because they were weak, but because history itself was against them. For tonight, though, there was this: the fire, the voices, the sense of safety purchased with courage and blood. Sarah McKenna closed her eyes, said a prayer of thanks to a God she was no longer sure she believed in, and let herself simply be. Alive. Claimed. Home. For however long home could last. Spring became summer. Summer faded into autumn, and Sarah McKenna discovered that survival was not a destination, but a daily practice. The Garrett brothers never returned, but their absence did not bring peace. The cavalry increased patrols. New settlers pushed into traditional Apache hunting grounds. Treaties were proposed, then broken before the ink dried. The pressure was constant, inexorable, like water wearing away stone. Sarah learned to live with uncertainty as her constant companion. She also learned to truly see the people who had saved her, not as the noble savages of romantic fiction, not as the bloodthirsty demons of settler nightmares, but as human, complex, flawed, beautiful, struggling. She saw Goyawe's gentleness with his younger siblings, saw how he taught them to track, to shoot, to survive, with a patience that contrasted sharply with his warrior's face. She saw Beshkela's quiet grief for a world that was disappearing, saw how he told the old stories to the children, keeping alive a history that schools and churches were determined to erase. She saw Kasa's fierce love for her people, saw how the older woman worked herself to exhaustion, ensuring everyone was fed, clothed, prepared for whatever hardship came next. And she saw Nantan's ongoing struggle with loss, saw how he sometimes stood apart from the camp, staring toward the horizon where his wife and daughter had died, saw how he carried their memory like a physical weight. Sarah found herself drawn to these quiet observations, found herself caring in ways that went beyond gratitude. These were her people now, not by blood, not by birth, but by choice and circumstance and the bonds forged in shared struggle. Zitkala married that autumn, a young warrior named Chato from a neighboring band. The celebration was joyful despite the uncertain times. There was dancing, singing, food shared freely. Sarah helped prepare the feast, her hands now as skilled as any Apache woman's at grinding meal and roasting meat. During the celebration, Zitkala pulled Sarah aside, spoke with the directness that came from true friendship. "You have become one of us," Zitkala said. "Not Apache. You will never be that, but something else. Something between. It is good. You show us that some white people can see beyond their fear, can learn, can change." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't deserve." Zitkala cut her off. "Deserve is a white man's word. We do not think of deserve. We think of yes. You are here. You are part of this. That is what matters." That winter was brutal, colder than any in recent memory. Food grew scarce. Hunting was difficult in the deep snow. The band was forced to move several times, seeking shelter, seeking game, seeking any advantage against the cold that killed. 3 elders died that winter, and 1 child. A little girl named Chuli, barely 4 years old, who caught a fever that no remedy could break. Sarah held Chuli's mother while the woman keened her grief, held her and rocked her, and had no words to offer. What words existed for such loss? What comfort could be given in a world so cruel? But she held her anyway, offered presence when words failed. It was all anyone could do. Spring returned. The band survived, but they were fewer, weaker, more vulnerable. And then the soldiers came. Not to the hidden springs, not to their sanctuary, but close, too close. A new military expedition pushing into the high country, searching for Apache bands, claiming the land in the name of progress and civilization and manifest destiny. Taza called a council. His face was grave, the discussion was heated. Some argued for fighting, others for fleeing, others for trying. One more time. To make peace. Sarah listened, said nothing. This was not her choice to make. But when the council ended, Taza called her forward, spoke to her directly. You understand white men's ways, he said. You speak their language perfectly. We need someone to go to the soldiers, to speak for us, to try, one more time, to make them understand. Sarah's blood ran cold. You want me to negotiate? You are between worlds, Taza said. Perhaps you can build a bridge neither side can build alone. It was the most terrifying responsibility Sarah had ever been given. More terrifying than running from the Garrett brothers. More terrifying than her first days in camp. Because this time, failure would not cost only her life. But she agreed. Because refusing was unthinkable. Nantan volunteered to accompany her. Also, Goyawe. They approached the military camp under a white flag, their hearts in their throats. The commanding officer was a captain named Robert Morrison, young, earnest, truly believing he was bringing civilization to savages. Sarah recognized the type. She had once been that type, certain of her own righteousness, blind to complexity. She spoke to Captain Morrison for hours, explained the Apache's legitimate grievances, explained the broken treaties, explained that these were not savages, but people with families and culture and every right to exist. Morrison listened, truly listened, and when she finished, he looked genuinely troubled. I believe you, he said quietly. I believe everything you've said, but my orders don't come from belief. They come from Washington, and Washington has decided this land is needed for settlement. The Apache, they are seen as obstacles to progress. His honesty was almost worse than hatred would have been. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Morrison sighed. I can give you time. I can delay my orders. Claim we're still mapping the territory. Maybe 2 months, maybe 3. But eventually, for pressure will come. And when it does, I won't be able to stop what follows. Sarah returned to camp with this bitter knowledge. Taza received her report without surprise. He had lived long enough to expect nothing better. That night, Sarah walked with Nantan to the edge of camp. They stood looking out over the vast landscape, mountains and desert stretching to the horizon. We are dying, Nantan said quietly. Not today, not tomorrow, but slowly. Our way of life, it cannot survive what is coming. We all know this, even those who will not say it. Sarah's heart ached. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Nantan shook his head. Why do you apologize for what you did not cause? You did not make this world. You are only trying to survive in it, like all of us. He paused, then added softly, You gave us something. Sarah McKenna, you reminded us that not all white people are the same, that some can learn, can change, can see us. That matters. Maybe it doesn't change the ending, but it matters. Sarah stood beside this man who had saved her life, who had defended her, who had taught her to survive, and she understood that what she felt was not gratitude, not anymore. It was love, the fierce, complicated love of family. Not the family you are born into, but the family you choose, the family that chooses you. The seasons turned. Summer came again. The band moved, adapted, survived. Sarah moved with them, no longer a refugee but a member, still between worlds, but making that space her own. She would never be Apache, but she was no longer quite white either. She was something new, something that existed only because 2 worlds had collided and, instead of destroying each other, had found a way to build. It would not last. She knew this. History was not on their side. The ending was already written by forces far beyond any of them. But for now, there was this. The life, the people, the daily struggle and daily victories, the profound gift of being seen and valued for who she truly was. Sarah McKenna had found refuge with the Apache, but somewhere along the way, refuge had become home, and home, even temporary home, even doomed home, was everything. 2 years passed like water through fingers. Too precious, Ray, too brief. Sarah McKenna was 25 years old when the final evacuation order came. 25 years old and no longer the terrified woman who had stumbled into Apache territory. She was lean and strong and carried herself with a quiet confidence that came from surviving impossible things. The government's patience had run out. The Apache bands were to be relocated, moved to reservations in the south, contained, controlled, civilized. The words they used made it sound like charity, like progress, like mercy. It was none of those things. It was elimination by other means. Taza was 70 years old. He had fought longer than Sarah had been alive, and he was tired, so terribly tired. When the final orders came, he gathered his people and spoke the words that broke their hearts. We go, not because we surrender, but because we have children to protect, elders to shelter, because sometimes survival means accepting what we cannot change. We go, and we remember. We tell our stories, we keep our ways alive, even in captivity we remain Apache, the day they left the mountains. Sarah stood at the edge of camp one last time, looked out over the landscape that had been her salvation, tried to memorize every detail, the way sunlight struck the red rocks, the sound of wind through pine trees, the vast sky that seemed to promise freedom even as freedom was being taken away. Nantan found her there. He was 33 now. His face was harder than when she had first met him. Loss had carved deeper lines. But his eyes still held that fierce spark that refused to be extinguished. You could leave, he said quietly. You are white. You could return to your people. Build a life there. Sarah looked at him. This man who had saved her life, who had become brother, friend, family. These are my people, she said, for better or worse. I go where you go. Nantan nodded slowly. Then, for the first time in 2 years, he smiled. It was brief, sad, but genuine. You are a strange woman, Sarah McKenna. But we are glad you are strange with us. The journey south was brutal. Soldiers escorted them, not with overt cruelty, but with the casual indifference of people moving livestock. The Apache were given minimal rations, forced to march in the brutal heat. The old and young suffered most. 2 more elders died on the journey, and another child. Each loss was a wound that would not heal. Sarah walked with the women, carried children when mothers were too exhausted, shared her water, used her status as a white woman to occasionally shame soldiers into slightly better treatment. Small victories, pathetically small, but victories nonetheless. They arrived at the reservation in late summer. San Carlos, a place of dust and despair where multiple Apache bands were being consolidated, forced to live in proximity with old enemies, forced to abandon their traditional ways, forced to become what the white man insisted they become, or starve. Sarah saw the death of spirit happen slowly, watched proud warriors reduced to begging for rations, watched women forced to give up traditional crafts, watched children sent to boarding schools where they were beaten for speaking their own language. She watched, and she documented. It started simply. Sarah began writing letters, to newspapers, to politicians, to anyone who might listen. She described what she saw with clarity and passion and unflinching honesty. She described the Apache not as savage enemies, but as human beings, families, communities, people with every right to dignity and survival. Most of her letters went unanswered, but some were published. Some found their way to people who cared. Some began building a counter-narrative to the official story. Sarah McKenna, the woman who had fled into Apache country as a terrified refugee, became a voice for the voiceless. Zitkala's husband Chato died that first winter on the reservation, a fever that should not have killed a man so young and strong, but malnutrition and despair made every illness deadly. Zitkala grieved with a silent intensity that frightened Sarah. For weeks, the young woman barely spoke, barely ate. Sarah sat with her, day after day, offering nothing but presents. Finally, one evening, Zitkala spoke. He was a warrior. He should have died fighting. Not like this, not wasting away in this place. Her voice broke on the last word. Sarah reached for her hand. He died surviving. That is a warrior's death too. Perhaps harder, perhaps braver. Zitkala looked at her with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. You understand us, she said. How? How does a white woman understand? Because I watched, Sarah said. Because I listened. Because you let me. Because you taught me that people are people, no matter what stories are told about them. 5 years on the reservation. 5 years of slow starvation of body and spirit. But 5 years of resistance too. Quiet resistance. Apache parents teaching children their language in secret. Elders telling stories the government tried to erase. Warriors keeping their pride even when stripped of everything else. And Sarah, writing, always writing. Building a record that could not be denied. Testifying to truth in a world drowning in lies. Nantan became a leader in this quiet resistance. He organized the younger men. Kept them from the despair that led to drinking and violence. Reminded them who they were. Some nights, Sarah would see him standing at the edge of the reservation, staring toward the mountains they had left. His face would be so lonely it hurt to look at. She understood. He was mourning. Not just for his wife and daughter, but for a world, an entire way of being that was being systematically destroyed. One evening, Sarah approached him. They had not spoken privately in weeks. The reservation made privacy nearly impossible. Tell me about them, Sarah said quietly. Your wife, your daughter. Tell me their names. Nantan looked at her sharply. Apache did not speak easily of the dead, but something in Sarah's face made him decide. Dakea, he said. My wife. It means she laughs often. And she did. Even in hard times, she found reasons to laugh. Our daughter, Ishta. First, because she was our first child, our only child. His voice caught. Sarah waited. Ishta was 3 when the soldiers came. She had just learned to sing. All day she would sing this little song Dakea taught her, about a rabbit and a coyote. I can still hear it. He stopped, swallowed hard. I was not there, I was hunting. When I returned, the village was burned. Everyone dead. I found them together. Dakea had been trying to protect our daughter. She died covering Ishta's body with her own. But it did not matter. They killed them anyway. Sarah's tears fell silently. Nantan saw them, reached out to touch her face with surprising gentleness. You weep for people you never knew. This is why you belong with us. Years passed, slowly, agonizingly. Conditions on the reservation began to improve, not from government charity, but from public pressure. Letters like Sarah's, testimonies, investigations, slowly built a case that could not be ignored. Small changes, better rations, less brutal restrictions. Not justice, not even close, but marginally less injustice. It was something. Taza died in his sleep at 77, peacefully, surrounded by family. His last words were to remind his people to never forget who they were, to survive, to endure, to keep the stories alive. They buried him in the traditional way, in secret, away from government eyes. Sarah stood with the mourners and understood she was witnessing the end of an era. Taza had been born free, had lived most of his life free, had led his people with wisdom and courage, and he had died, if not free, at least unbowed. His legacy would live in the children, in the stories, in the Apache who refused to be erased. Casa took over as matriarch of their band. The older woman was in her 60s but remained formidable. She gathered the women, organized them, made sure traditional crafts continued, made sure knowledge passed from generation to generation, made sure the Apache survived, not just physically, but culturally. Sarah worked beside her, no longer an outsider, simply family. On Sarah's 30th birthday, a concept the Apache found amusing but indulged, Casa gave her a gift. A basket, beautiful, intricate, woven with skill that represented a lifetime of knowledge. "You came to us with nothing," Casa said. "Now you have this, our skills, our knowledge, our trust. This basket will outlive us both. It will carry water long after we are dust. That is legacy. That is what matters." Sarah held the basket and understood she was holding more than woven willow. She was holding acceptance, proof that transformation was possible, that bridges could be built between worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. She was holding hope. The years continued their relentless march. Sarah turned 35, then 40. Her hair began to show silver. Her hands grew more gnarled. But she remained with the people who had saved her, remained as witness, as friend, as family. Goyahawe married, had children, named his first daughter Dakea, in honor of Nantan's lost wife. The baby was fierce and loud and beautiful. Nantan held her carefully, his scarred hands gentle, and Sarah saw tears slide down his weathered face. "Life," he whispered, "life continues, even here, even now." Sarah McKenna lived to be 67 years old. She died quietly, peacefully, in her sleep, just as Taza had. She was surrounded by Apache who called her grandmother and sister, friend, who mourned her as one of their own. They buried her in the traditional way, against government regulations, with full Apache ceremony, because she had earned it, through loyalty, through love, through the kind of courage that meant staying when leaving would have been easier. Zitkala, now an old woman herself, spoke at the burial. "She came to us running from death. We gave her life. She gave us something too. She gave us proof that change is possible. That understanding can cross any divide. That family is not blood. It is choice. She chose us, we chose her, and that choice made all of us more than we were alone." The wind carried those words across the desert. Toward mountains the Apache could no longer freely roam, toward a future uncertain and painful and possible. Because Sarah McKenna had lived, had witnessed, had remembered, had written it all down. The truth of what happened, the truth of who the Apache were, the truth that no amount of propaganda could erase. Her papers survived, her letters survived, her testimony survived. It became part of the historical record, imperfect, incomplete, but there, undeniable. And in that survival, there was victory, small, quiet, but real. The Apache endured. They survived. They kept their language alive, their stories alive, their identity alive. It was not the life their ancestors had known, not the freedom their people had fought for, but it was life. And life, as Nantan had said, was sacred. Sarah McKenna's story became Apache's story, passed down through generations, embellished, mythologized, but never forgotten. The white woman who ran to the Apache, who learned their ways, who stood with them, who chose them when her own people would have called her traitor. She was remembered not as white or Apache, but as something between, something new, something that proved love and loyalty and family could transcend any boundary society tried to impose. And that legacy, that impossible, beautiful legacy, endured. Long after the last person who knew her personally had died, long after the reservations became something different, long after the world changed in ways Sarah could never have imagined, the story remained, a testament to courage, to compassion, to the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be conquered, that refuses to surrender, that finds ways to survive and thrive even in the harshest circumstances. Sarah McKenna found refuge with the Apache, but in the end, they had found refuge with each other, in the space between worlds, in the bonds formed by shared struggle, in the profound truth that family is not where you come from, but who stands with you when everything else falls away. That truth echoed across generations, across centuries, across all the years that followed, and it endured. Just like Sarah, just like the Apache, just like the love that bound them together, unbreakable, undeniable, eternal. As the fire burned low beneath the desert stars, Sarah McKenna's journey became more than survival. It became a story of change, of finding family where the world said none existed. The wind still carries her name, whispered across canyons, remembered by those who knew what she stood for. Because some stories never fade. They live on, in hearts that still believe in courage, loyalty, and hope. If her story moved you, like this video, subscribe for more tales of the untamed frontier, and comment where you'd seek refuge if the world ever turned against you. Until the next ride, partner, stay brave.